It's a decision for the President of the United States. Now, with that being said, we're going to work with the states because it's very important. You have a couple of bands of Democrat governors, but they will agree to it. They will agree to it. But the authority of the President of the United States having to do with the subject we're talking about is total.
A constitutional clash now seems to be in the works. President Trump right there insisting he has total authority to reopen the country. Some of the nation's governors going their own way, arguing the decision is really up to them. John Bussey is associate editor of the Wall Street Journal and a Fox News contributor. John, good morning. The president says he has total authority. Does he?
Well, not really. The states have police powers, and the health and safety and well-being of their citizens fall under those powers, granted to the states by the Constitution. So the states put these orders in place. They created the lockdowns. They will be the ones that lift them. I think at the end of the day, though, Ed, this is probably an academic argument, an academic dispute. The bully pulpit of the presidency is very powerful. And if the president is saying people, it's time to go back to work, it's going to be a lot of pressure on the states to do something about that. But at the same time, the states are not going to yield to the president. They want to see the science, as your reports have just indicated, show that it is safe for people to go back to work. Folks are not going to get on transport if they're worried about their own safety. Yeah,
to your point, Governor Andrew Cuomo, who in some ways has given the president high marks, has said he's willing to work with them, was singing a little bit of a different tune this morning. Listen.
I don't know what the president is talking about, frankly. We have a Constitution. The Constitution is based on balance of powers. We don't have a king. We have a president. So the president doesn't have total authority. The Constitution is there. 10th Amendment is there. Number of cases over the years. It's very clear. States have power by the 10th Amendment. And the president is just wrong on that point.
But the House Republican whip, Steve Scalise, was on this program last hour and was basically saying, look, it was the president, the federal government that stepped in, even as governors and mayors were doing their thing, and said, here's the 15 days to stop the spread. Here are the guidelines now extended another month. And that likewise, as we sort of unwind that, the federal government has an important role to play.
Well, the federal government certainly does have an important role to play. Governors would argue that the president was pressured into making those statements that we're going to have a 15-day. Remember, he wanted to lift it on Easter, and then finally pressured again into making it 30 days. So the governors and the president are at odds about this. What the governors are concerned most about, Ed, is that the testing procedures and the surveillance procedures are in place. As William was pointing out in the last report, they have to be in place for the governors to feel confident that if any washover from another state, infections coming in from outside the state or within the state, they're identified quickly, they're isolated, contact tracing happens, and the quarantines are put in place around small clusters to keep the public safe. Until that safety and testing regimen is robust enough, the governor is going to have a very hard time lifting any of these restrictions.
Extraordinary news conference at the White House yesterday, among other things, when the president opened things up with Dr. Fauci. There had been a lot of reports that maybe they were at odds. I'm thinking of this, as you mentioned a moment ago, that when the president made that first decision to have the guidelines to stop the spread and then expand it, Dr. Fauci was very clear yesterday in saying, when I went to the president and said, you got to follow the science here, he listened to me. And then reporters tried to say, wait, are you being forced to say this? And he said, he got kind of angry, Dr. Fauci, and said, everything I say is voluntary. It seemed to give the president some credit there, number one. But how does that inform, most importantly, the decision moving forward to reopen things? Dr. Fauci seemed to be clear that the president has listened to him.
Well, I think that the concern has been that medical advisors, science advisors, national security advisors were arguing within the White House much earlier than the president says that certain restrictions had to be put in place to stop the epidemic from becoming a pandemic and sweeping through the United States as it has. And Fauci, I think giving the president some credit for the president agreeing with him. The question is the timing, finally agreeing with him, and the delays that allowed for the disease to spread further. That's the argument. That's the point of tension. I don't think that's been resolved. I don't think that there's any clarity on that. The president is endorsing Fauci because Fauci is right now the source of a lot of credibility for the White House. And I don't think that he wants to undercut him too much in a public setting.
Absolutely. In the last 30 seconds we have, no matter how all this works out with the governors, the president, the American workplace is changing and changing dramatically, isn't it?
You know, it really is. It's going to be very interesting, Ed, to watch how much of these changes continue on after the lockdown stops. I think that this notion of working from home or working remotely at a minimum is going to affect the way business handles its process. Do you need to travel so much? Do you have to go to that meeting? Is Zoom or Hangout or some other mechanism just as sufficient? I think that this will have lasting effect on how business operates and business continuity and, frankly, preparation. This was a black swan. Business is going to have a long list of possible black swans that it's going to analyze, and I think society will too, and ask, are we prepared?
Impact still being felt indeed. John Bussey, appreciate it.
Pleasure.